Alright, we are on page 153. We're doing question number 32. The question is, if y equals 9 times the tangent of x divided by 3, what is y double prime? Double prime, of course, means the second derivative, so we could just as easily write it as d squared y dx squared. Of course, we never say it that way. It's the second derivative of y. But you can't do the second derivative until you do the first one, so let's do that first. So we want y prime, single prime. Well, it's 9 times the tangent of x over 3. 9 is just a constant, so that gets pulled out in front. And then we need to do the derivative of the tangent of x over 3. If this was just tangent of x, we'd be able to use our rule and say that tangent of x goes to secant squared of x. But it's not, it's tangent of x divided by 3, so that means we need to use the chain rule. If there's anything other than just a plain old x inside there, we got to go to the chain rule. So if we were plugging a number in for this, we would take that number and we would divide it by 3, and then we would take that answer and we'd find the tangent of it. So our outside function is tangent. That's f. The inside function is the fact that we divided by 3. So that's x over 3 for g. Well, said it a second ago, if f is tangent, f prime, we may not have this rule memorized yet, but a quick check of your notes will show you that the derivative of tangent is secant squared. Don't worry about the fact that those aren't memorized yet. Those will come with practice. G is x divided by 3. So what's g prime? It's tempting to use the quotient rule here because it's x divided by 3. And if you do, it'll be okay. You'll get the right answer. But that's actually the harder way to go. Don't think of this as x divided by 3. Think of this as x times 1/3. And when we think of it like that, it's real easy to see what the derivative is. It's 1/3 times the derivative of x, which is 1. So g prime is just 1/3. If we had done the quotient rule, we would have gotten this same thing, but it would have been a lot of work to get there. And this way is so much easier. Okay, so that means y prime is 9, this 9 out front, times the derivative of tangent of x over 3. That's what we're going to get out of our chain rule. F prime of g. So that's secant squared of x over 3. Times g prime. G prime is 1/3. At this point, Tanner is saying we don't have to simplify it. Don't simplify it. We're not going to simplify it. And you're right, you don't have to simplify it. But since we are not stopping here, we're going on, our lives are simpler if we simplify it. 9 times 1/3 is just 3. So we have 3 times secant squared of x over 3. And that's y prime, but of course our goal was to find y double prime. So we now have to take the derivative of that. So okay, this is getting a little crowded. Why don't we pop up a new slide here? We have y prime was 3 times the secant squared of 1/3 x over 3, and we're looking for y double prime. Y double prime will be 3 times the derivative of secant squared of x over 3. And of course, that's 3 times the derivative of a function of a function of a function. We've got, if we were putting a number in for x, we would take that number, we would divide it by 3, and then we would take the secant of that, and then we would square it. That's 3 different things we're doing. We're dividing by 3, we're taking the secant, we're squaring. That means we've got an f and a g and an h. We have 3 different functions happening here. The outside function, the thing we do last, is square it. X squared. The next function, the thing we did before we squared it, was take the secant of it. And the inside function was to take it and divide it by 3. So okay, if f is x squared, f prime 2x, g is secant of x, g prime, this would be a good point to pause the video and pull out your notes and see if you can find what the derivative of secant is. I'll give you a second to pause it. Alright, good job. It is secant times tangent. The derivative of secant is secant times tangent. And the derivative of x divided by 3, we talked about earlier, is 1/3. Okay, so we're ready to move on here. Y double prime is this 3 here times what we get out of the chain rule. We have a lot of links in the chain. There's F, and there's G, and there's H. How do we deal with that? Here's what we do. We take F prime, just like normal, and we replace the X in F prime with G. So instead of 2 times X, it's 2 times G, which is secant. But since G is not the end of the chain, we don't stop with G. We replace X in the G function too with H. So let's take a look at that. We did F prime of G of H. Then we go to the next step, times G prime. G prime is secant times tangent. But that's not the end of the chain. G is not the last function. So we can't just write G prime. We have to plug in H. You know what, let's put this in a different color. So I'm doing G prime here in this black color. G prime is secant times tangent, but we're going to replace the x's in G prime with h. Since h is our last function, it's the end of the chain, we don't need to go any further than h because there's nowhere else to go. So we took g prime and we took it times h. But that's not the end because we still have h prime. H prime, just 1/3. That h prime went over here. So I don't know what that is really doing. Okay. So see what happened? F prime of g of h, g prime of h prime. Anytime you do a chain rule, no matter how many functions there are, f, g, h, maybe there's a j and a k and an l, there might be a bunch of functions. You'll use every single one of the prime functions exactly once. We used f prime once, we used g prime once, we used h prime once, and every time you use one of these functions, then you go over and use the next link in the chain, not the prime version, but the original version, and you just go down your list. It was f prime of g of h. It was g prime of h. If there was another function, say k, it would be f prime of g of h of k, and g prime of h of k, and h prime of k, and k prime. So these chains can get fairly long. What's nice is doing this a few times, you're going to be doing this in your head, and you're probably not going to even specifically think about F's and G's. You're just going to do the links, and it'll come naturally to you. We're still in the learning process, so that's going to take a little while. Tanner says he wants to be done and not simplify, and that is, of course, fine, but we're going to go ahead and simplify because, come on, a 3 times a third, those cancel. And then we've got a secant of x divided by 3 times another secant of x over 3. Well, that's secant squared. And then we've got this tangent. And there it is, y double prime is 2 times the secant squared of x over 3 times the tangent of x over 3.